Excellent. We're very excited to see so many people joining. We know that there is a lot of interest in this topic. For those of you who are interested in the Spanish interpretation, we will be explaining how to use the interpretation. Para los que hablan el español y quieren la interpretación, vamos a explicar cómo pueden estar en el canal para español. While we're waiting to begin, if people, I see they're doing it already, please include your name, organization, and the country that you are calling us from in the chat. We're very excited to see we have people from all over the world in this webinar. And we will start very soon. Excellent. Very exciting to see so many people. Para los que hablan el español, si pueden poner su nombre, su organización o institución y el país de donde están llamando en el chat. Sabemos que tenemos muchos de varios países del mundo. Y vamos a comenzar en unos minutos. Muchísimas gracias. Hey, welcome everyone. It's fun to see some familiar names signing in. I think we're going to wait about 1 more minute and then we will get started with this webinar. Thanks everybody for showing up on time. We are very excited to be with you for the next hour and a half. Okay, excellent. Thanks everybody for writing your names, organization or institution and country in the chat. Without further ado, I think we can get started. Next slide, please. So for interpretation, we are delighted that we have Spanish and English interpretation available. For those of you who would like English, please look down at the bottom of your screen to the interpretation button and press on English. And that's where you will be able to hear myself and other presenters speak in English. Y para los que hablan el español y quieren la interpretación en español, hay un botón abajo que dice Interpretation. Si puede tocar y poner el Spanish o español. Y ahí va a tener la interpretación de español. Si todos pueden hacer eso, debe estar en inglés o en español. Excellent. Next slide, please. So welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have so many people from so many different organizations, different experiences, and different parts of the world join us This webinar is part of a series of webinars from the Transforming Children's Care Global Collaborative Platform. And you will hear more about that and have the chance to learn more about the platform towards the end of this webinar. The platform establishes more strategic, sector-wide collaboration. And you'll be able to sign up at the link in the chat to join the platform and receive updates about future webinars. Next slide. This webinar is going to be recorded and made available both in English and in Spanish. So we really hope that if you have colleagues or friends that aren't able to attend today, that they will be shared the links to the recordings. We really want as many people who are interested in this important topic to be able to access the information. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat. And we will have 3 polls throughout the webinar, questions that will be helpful and interesting and give us a little bit more insight into who's joining us today and what kind of experience you have in the topic and what kind of additional information you'd like to have. Please use the Q&A button below to ask questions or make comments. If you have specific questions or comments for one of the presenters, we'd like to ask you to please include their name. And we will have time at the end of this webinar for questions. So please do target the question with a name. Next slide, please. So to introduce myself, I'm Kelly Bunkers. I am a senior technical advisor with the Changing the Way We Care initiative. I'm also a senior associate with Maestral International, and I am a big fan and a member of the collaborative platform. I will be your moderator today, and I am joined by several fabulous people who are going to share their experience in trauma-informed care with all of you. Next slide, please. This is our agenda today. We'll be together for an hour and a half, and our panelist presentations or discussions will begin with Innocent Habimfura from Hope and Homes for Children, based in Rwanda, Julie Cooper from Trauma Free World. Then we'll move to Patricia Flores from Back to Back in Mexico, Camille Evans of the UNICEF Regional Office for Southeast Asia, and Kia Hem of Hagar International Cambodia. Each of these excellent presenters will be sharing a little bit about their unique work and the important role that trauma-informed care plays in children's care in their context. And then we'll end with time for question and answers. Next slide, please. So now we have a poll. You will see it on your screen. And we don't have it in Spanish, but our adept translators will be reading it for you. But we ask that you please vote. The first question is, have you ever been trained in trauma-informed care? Please select one answer only. Yes, I am fully trained in trauma-informed care. Number 2, yes, I have received some training in trauma-informed care. 3, no, I have never received training in trauma-informed care. And 4, no, but I have received training in another type of mental health and psychosocial support. So please do vote, and we will see what kind of responses we have. And while you're voting, I just want to say I'm thrilled to say that we have over 200 participants with us today. Really exciting. Okay, do we have responses? Let's see. Okay, so about 8%, 10 of you have been fully trained. 42% or 53 have received some training. 30 or about 1/4 of you have not received training. So we're thrilled that you're interested and that you're here. And another 1/4 of you, 26%, have received training, but in something related or similar to trauma-informed care. Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, next slide. I am delighted now to ask our friend and colleague, Innocent Habimfura, the Regional Director for East and Southern Africa and the Country Director for Rwanda of Hope and Homes for Children, to begin this webinar, giving us a framework for why a trauma-informed care approach is so critical for those of us who are working in the care sector. Innocent, please.
Thank you, Kelly. Distinguished colleagues, partners, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor and privilege that I'm participating in this learning opportunity, and as we always cherish opportunities to improve our ways of working with children, families, and communities. Talking about child care without involving a trauma-informed approach would be superficial. Our experience in this sector is generally summarized in child deinstitutionalization, which is an approach of ensuring children grow up in caring families. This includes prevention of child separation from their families, reintegration for those in alternative care, and placements in adoption or suitable foster care of those whose separation cannot be avoided or where such placements are in the best interest of the child. It appears imperative to apply trauma-informed care approach and ensure children, families, and communities are safe throughout this process. Taking into consideration that each child, each person, each family, each community is unique in abilities, aspirations, weaknesses, and particularly the unique post-traumatic experience, it is vital to ensure a trauma-informed care approach is applied to identify the traumatic experience itself, assess its impact on the individual or group, and jointly design an informed intervention to heal such life wounds. And when you are implementing a child care program in Rwanda, a country that experienced genocide against Tutsi in 1994, where the entire social fabric was heavily destroyed by man-made extreme traumatic events, engaging each stakeholder with trauma-informed care lenses is critical to achieve better outcomes on children, families, and communities. I remember Esther coming to our office with such a good intention to adopt a child, a boy with insistence of a particular age, and with an additional criteria to be with resemblance of her brother brutally killed during genocide, seen from her hidden place. This followed Esther's visit to the institution or orphanage, where she had to meet with a child. Case managers have provisionally matched with her. She suddenly saw an 8-year-old boy in the institution who Esther's confirmed was a copy of her late brother. Here is another example of how uncertain would be a child care intervention that does not apply trauma-informed care. A young couple was peacefully living together for a year, even though they were struggling to secure their daily meal due to insecure source of income. The situation changed with their firstborn, a pretty baby girl born with disabilities. Dispute immediately started at the maternity ward as the husband refused to recognize the child, highlighting they don't have any history of such a child in their family. This is rooted in the ancient traditional Rwanda, where disability was perceived as a curse, a punishment for some taboo violations, or not complying with cultural values, and all the blame to the wife, who was later abandoned alone with the baby in miserable conditions. Chantal did her best to keep caring for her baby Naomi. It was not easy for her to meet with the family basic needs alone, as she dedicated all the time to Naomi, the baby. It is far from being her choice when Chantal abandoned the baby in the night at the entry of a health facility with hope that a good Samaritan would rescue the baby. Naomi is currently 15 years old and has confirmed she was never consulted when moving from one family to another or her placement into different institutions. These two examples are not enough to represent the complexity of traumatic situations that children, families, and communities have and continue to experience. And I honestly recognize that you are working with children, families, and communities that have faced even more complex challenges, while yourself, myself, ourselves may have not yet been supported to overcome our own traumatic experiences. It is time for all of us to recognize the need to apply trauma-informed care, give more rooms to people we work with, and support each other and support each stakeholder to heal life wounds, to prevent re-traumatization and improve our child care system. I thank you for listening. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. We thank you, Innocent. Thank you for sharing that and just reminding us not only about the experiences of Rwanda, but also why understanding trauma-informed care in the work that we do with children is so important. Thank you, Innocent. And now I would like to introduce Julie Cooper. Julie is Senior Vice President for Training and Curriculum for Trauma-Free World. And Julie will be giving us some important information as to what is trauma-informed care, what does it look like in children and families, and why is it so important for practitioners, those of us who work with children and families, to understand. Julie, welcome, and please.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you, Innocent, for setting up our time. And as we continue to set up our time, I'm going to take just a quick moment to answer 3 questions about trauma-informed care as we head into our time. We're going to talk about what is it, what are the effects of trauma, and then why is it important to learn about that. So what is trauma? And first, I just want to mention, we're hearing a lot about trauma. Why is that? That is because we realize that what we once thought was a unique event that was only happening in places with extreme conditions, trauma is actually pretty common, and it's not the exception. We know today that of the 2 billion children alive on the planet, at least 1 billion have experienced trauma in the last year alone. So trauma-informed care, this is for all of us, and it's a pleasure to share. Trauma is the experience of an event that overwhelms our capacity to cope. And I mentioned that perception matters because we have siblings growing up in the same home, growing up in the same community, who experience things differently, and they come out of those experiences differently because perception matters. Now, what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care are practices that promote safety, empowerment, and healing. We're going to hear a lot more about that here today on this webinar, as well as see some practical implementation of fantastic organizations who are putting this into practice. Types of trauma. Let's go back just 1 second, if you don't mind. I'll quickly comment on the types of trauma because we get this question a lot. We have acute trauma. An acute trauma can be either environmental or interpersonal. So environmental, a tsunami or a house fire. Interpersonal, a one-time assault, a rape, whether that be physical or sexual. Those are acute traumas, one time. I'm going to slow my speaking down as well. I apologize to our translation. Chronic trauma is ongoing trauma. So this can be repeated abuse or neglect. This can be ongoing community violence. But a difference between chronic and that third category of complex developmental trauma is that complex developmental trauma, we're talking young. This is trauma happening in children chronically under the age of 5. And that has really deep impact on children. So it has its own category of trauma. Okay, thank you. Next slide now. So our next question, we talked about what is trauma. Our next question, what are the effects of trauma? These 2 slides show us in literal visual images the effects of trauma. Here we see the effect of neglect. Neglect deprives a child of what their brains and bodies need to literally grow. We say that brain development is relationship dependent. And in that slide of neglect, we see those 2 brains. The slide of extreme neglect, that is a child lacking safe relationship. Now let's look at abuse. So I don't want to be overly technical, but I love the visuals of these slides. The abuse slide, we look at the red and we see that that is blood flow. Blood flow means good activity is happening. In the left picture, that child has good blood flow in all of the areas. And the child in the right, the majority of their blood flow is in the back, and that is the fear center of the brain. Now, when kids are in our programs or in our communities, do we see brain scans? No. What we see is typically behavior. So next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of some of the behaviors that we see that are coming out of a place of trauma. These are coming out of a place of kids who don't believe they can trust the world. They don't believe they can trust adults to meet their needs. And so they develop protective strategies. These will sound familiar to you. They are things like manipulation, triangulation, lying, verbal aggression, physical violence, and control. What we want to remember when we see these behaviors is that these are the behaviors not of a child who woke up and wanted you to have a bad day. These are the behaviors of a child who themselves is having a hard time. Okay, next slide, please. So our final question as we close up in our last couple minutes, why is it important as practitioners to learn about this? This pyramid shows how kids can grow from a place of being impacted by their trauma, overwhelmed, to a place of healing and health. I'll tell a very short story of a family I worked with in Nigeria. And the teenagers were very violent. The caregivers were actually returning violence with violence. And there was a lot of chaos and fear in the home. In the meantime, there was a little almost 3-year-old girl in the home who could not walk yet, and she couldn't talk. Now, developmentally, we know 3-year-olds should be able to walk and talk. and they took her to the doctor. They thought she had an infection, some kind of a disease, but she didn't. And they just said, kind of as an aside, you know, we're really working hard with her. As I worked with this family to use trauma-informed care to help replace violence with words and build on safety, not only did that home become an optimal healing place, the little girl in 6 months' time had grown inches in height, started walking, and started talking. She developed in a location of safety. Okay, next slide, please. And it all starts with a safe adult. Quick questions to leave us with. What is felt safety? Not just physically being safe, but kids experiencing safety. How do we really reach a child or adolescent? That is when we put relationship above controlling behavior. And the question that we ask ourselves is, are we looking for long-term healing or just momentary behavioral control? If we're looking for long-term healing, trauma-informed care is the way that we want to move forward. Thank you so much for the time. In the link for anyone who is interested, I'm just going to throw a resource. First of all, these slides, and also a resource that if you're interested in extra training, please feel free to reach out and we would love to help you or your organization be trained. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie, so much. And please, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A button. And if it's for Innocent or Julie, please let us know. They will be monitoring the chat and we might take some of those questions and ask them at the end of the webinar. Okay, next slide, please, Margot. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Patricia Flores, who is the coordinator of the foster care program for Back to Back in Mexico. And Patricia will be explaining how they've integrated a trauma-informed approach into their work with foster families. She will be speaking in Spanish, so those of you in the English channel will be receiving the translation. Thank you and welcome, Patricia.
Muchísimas gracias. La verdad es que me encanta tener la oportunidad de coincidir en este espacio con ustedes para formarnos y seguirnos informando en el cuidado competente en trauma. Quiero compartirles la experiencia que hemos tenido en México, específicamente en Nuevo León. Hace 8 años iniciamos y fuimos los primeros en iniciar el acogimiento familiar en México, con muchos retos, con muchas dudas. Sin embargo, la experiencia de cuidado competente en trauma nos ayudó muchísimo para poder apoyar a los niños que estaban institucionalizados. Cuando arrancamos este programa, el equipo técnico estaba preparado y capacitado en trauma. Sin embargo, al tener a los niños ya en familias de acogimiento, nos fuimos dando cuenta de que realmente nuestras familias no tenían todo el conocimiento que debían tener. Tenían el corazón y la disposición para amar y cuidar a un niño de una institución, pero les faltaban las herramientas y eso hacía que a veces los acogimientos se complicaran cada vez más. De ahí fue que decidimos hacer o formar dentro de nuestras familias cuidadores competentes en trauma. Empezamos a capacitarlos, a formarlos y ahí es donde encontramos 3 objetivos principales. Si pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. 3 objetivos que buscamos lograr con nuestras familias de acogimiento y para beneficiar la vida de nuestros niños es que los adultos, que iban a ser los adultos seguros en la vida de los niños, fueran capaces de entender qué era el trauma, cómo este trauma impactaba la vida de los niños y alteraba todo su persona, su biología, reconocer cuándo una conducta podía ser motivada por el trauma y cuál era la mejor respuesta que podían dar ellos como adultos dentro del ambiente del acogimiento. Vamos a explicar un poquito estas 3 metas. Si pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. Bueno, ¿cómo vemos el comportamiento de los niños? Cuando no había un entendimiento acerca de qué era lo que estaba pasando en el cerebro de los niños, que aparte de que ellos vienen de un pasado difícil, de violencia, de negligencia, de abuso, y que esto había generado un impacto de trauma en sus vidas, pues si no tenían nuestras familias el entendimiento de que esto estaba pasando y había pasado en la vida de los niños, pues simplemente iban a ver niños desobedientes, niños retadores, niños malcriados. Decía una mamá de acogimiento, la intención de ellos no es echarte a perder la vida, aunque a veces logren ponernos en situaciones muy difíciles porque los adultos no sabían cómo responder. Pero cuando empezaron a tener el entendimiento del trauma, entonces transicionaron de ver solamente niños desobedientes a empezar a entender que ese comportamiento era un comportamiento de sobrevivencia, que no era algo que ellos quisieran o pudieran controlar, sino era a causa del impacto del trauma y lo único que ellos querían era sobrevivir a través de 3 conductas básicas que vamos a tener, y no nada más ellos, cualquiera de nosotros, son respuestas instintivas frente a una situación de evento traumático cuando se percibe que la vida está en peligro, y es atacar, huir o congelarse. Y a veces nuestras familias no sabían qué hacer frente a estas conductas. Cuando ellos lograron entender que esto era lo que estaba pasando en la vida de nuestros niños, pudieron entonces reconocer. Si pasamos a la siguiente. Bien, entonces al poder ellos reconocer, la respuesta del adulto hacia la conducta va a cambiar. Los adultos entonces ya no se ponían furiosos, ya no se enojaban, ya no querían aplicar la disciplina tradicional que sabemos que con los niños de un pasado difícil, con historia de trauma, no funciona. Y entonces empezaron a convertirse en adultos curiosos, adultos que querían observar qué era lo que estaba pasando, cuál era el detonador que estaba provocando esa mala conducta, entre comillas. A lo mejor era un recuerdo, algo de un procesamiento sensorial, algún olor, algún sonido que le evoca un recuerdo traumático. Y entonces nuestras familias pudieron empezar a entender y a ser más curiosos, a ser más observadores. Nosotros les decimos, tienen que volverse investigadores de la conducta, entender que si el niño está respondiendo de esa manera no es porque quiera portarse mal, sino porque está siendo rebasado por una situación que se está saliendo de su control. Y entonces el adulto puede responder de una manera correcta. Si avanzamos, por favor. Entonces encontramos que nuestros adultos pueden responder siguiendo esta línea. Lo primero que siempre buscamos es empoderar el cuerpo. Su organismo, su cuerpo está desregulado, tenemos que empoderarlo. Hay muchas técnicas que enseñamos a las familias a través de actividad física, a través de snacks saludable, a través de comidas cada 2 horas, porque recuerden que ellos vienen de hambre crónica, de sed crónica, de esa incertidumbre de no saber si va a haber comida o no. Entonces todo eso queda guardado en la memoria de su cuerpo. Lo primero que tenemos que hacer es empoderar el cuerpo, asegurar que nuestros niños tienen y están proveídos de todas sus necesidades físicas básicas. Después conectar. Es necesario que ya que empoderamos el cuerpo, tengamos ese tiempo de conexión en donde damos estrategias muy particulares y muy puntuales de cómo conectar, cómo escuchar, cómo mirar a los ojos, cómo ponernos a la altura de los niños. Y al final podemos llegar a la corrección, que la corrección no es como lo entendemos en la disciplina tradicional, de castigo, consecuencias, sino la corrección es te voy a enseñar y voy a caminar junto contigo este nuevo camino de aprendizaje en donde juntos vamos a descubrir cómo resolver esto que en este momento te está generando miedo o angustia. Pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. Y lo que hemos visto en la experiencia en estos 8 años, casi 160 acogimientos en el estado, son estas buenas noticias. A pesar de que nuestros niños vienen de un pasado difícil, con una historia complicada, el cerebro tiene plasticidad, el cerebro va a cambiar y ellos están en esa posibilidad de reaprender nuevas cosas. Entonces, siempre hay esperanza para sanar la vida de nuestros niños y transformar esa historia en mejores historias. Muchísimas gracias.
Excellent. Thank you, Patricia. And really exciting to see how this has been integrated into the important work in Mexico and with foster families. Really exciting. There's information on this slide. And we are getting some questions. So I would just encourage our panelists to review the Q&A. And if you can respond in written form, kindly do that. And if not, we will ask them at the end. Next slide, please. Great, we have another poll. So we're looking at trauma-informed care in your context. So question is, trauma-informed care approaches are, first answer, they are available and offered by other organizations in my context. Number two, trauma-informed care approaches are available and offered by my own organization, institution, or program. Number three, trauma-informed care approaches do not exist in my context. And number four, I don't have any information about whether or not trauma-informed care approaches exist in my context. So please, we encourage all of you, there are no wrong answers. So please take a minute and respond to this, just so we have a sense of how common trauma-informed care is in the different countries and contexts represented in our webinar today. We'll take just a moment. Okay, do we have responses? Here it comes. So in about 25%, they are offered by other organizations. 47%, or almost half of you, that's great news, have it available and you offer it in your own organization, institution, or program. In 8%, or 12 of you, said it doesn't exist. And 20% say you don't have information. So this is really helpful. Thank you for this. And I think what this says is there's just huge interest, and it looks like we also have some expertise in those of you who are listening in. So this is great. Okay, next slide, please. Our third presenter is Camille, our fourth presenter actually, excuse me, is Camille Evans. Camille is the Regional Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Capacity Strengthening Specialist for the UNICEF Regional Office for South Asia. However, the guidance that she's going to present, she developed together with Sean Long on behalf of Changing the Way We Care. So we're very excited to hear from Camille and learn about how this guidance looks at trauma-informed care from a resilience lens. Camille, please.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Next slide. So as Kelly mentioned, this guidance was developed as part of a consultancy with Changing the Way We Care. If we can just go back to the previous slide. And so we decided to call the guidance Promoting Resilience-Informed Care, because after we did a literature review, looking at the evidence for trauma-informed care, and also consultations with technical experts, we decided
Sorry,
that
Camille, they're having trouble hearing you. Are you in the English?
I am.
Okay.
It may just be my internet connection, so it should come back in a second.
Okay,
Hear
it
me
seems
now?
like, yes, now it is. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. No
Oh,
problem. And so, what I was saying is that when we were doing the literature review to look at how we could operationalize trauma informed care, and we spoke with technical experts, that talk to us about what would be useful for practitioners to know in order to use a trauma informed care approach. We decided that the best way to communicate about trauma informed care would be to focus on resilience. Next slide. And so, about this guidance is meant to support practitioners in understanding the experiences of children that may experience adversity that might lead to distress and trauma, and how they might be able to respond. It is for frontline workers. The thinking is that formal and informal practitioners will be able to use some of the resources from the guidance. And the why, I think you've heard the why. The why is we understand that children coming into alternative care have experienced adversity and a spectrum of experiences that could range from distress to trauma. And we need to be able to identify and understand the impact that this may be having. And so this guidance is meant to provide some tools to do that. I see that there's still some difficulty hearing me. I can try and change my internet connection. Um, but if you're
I
hearing me
think it's
well enough,
okay, Camille. Go
yeah?
ahead. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
and
great.
maybe just speak a little bit louder if you can. We
Okay,
appreciate technology and weather challenges, and thanks for your patience, everyone.
no problem. I'll try to speak a bit louder. Okay, next slide. So, the focus on resilience, as I mentioned, we took the evidence looking at trauma informed care. So, what you see on the screen, it's saying I can't hear. So, what you see on the screen are the 4 R's of trauma informed care: realize, recognize, respond, and resist re traumatization. And we looked at it in terms of the experiences that children may have, even if there isn't one distinct traumatic event that has happened, and even if it doesn't reach the experience, their personal experience of trauma, that we understand that there are other adverse experiences they may have within their lifetime that over time may result in experiences of trauma or distress. So, realizing the impact of adverse childhood experiences and that the traumatic experience is very subjective. I think Julie mentioned it depends on perception and individual experience. So, understanding that range and then recognizing protective factors as well as risk factors and understanding the signs and symptoms of distress. And understanding that because of that, we can interpret the way that we heard that we might be able to see some of the behavior of children through the lens of what distress does to the brain and traumatic experiences do to individuals, their relationships, families, and larger systems. In terms of responding, again, using this resilience lens, promoting resilience as a way of looking at each of the systems that impact the child's life. And so, looking at the impact of building their own resilience, the family's resilience, the community's resilience, and even the larger society. And then the last, resisting re traumatization. And we emphasize here not pathologizing because we understand that trauma itself is an ordinary response. It's a normal response in an extraordinary circumstance. Okay, Kelly, I
A
see you're
little
there.
bit
Next
slower.
slide.
Thank
So, one of the ways we try to set the tone for the guidance was to think about a metaphor of a piggy bank. And so the idea is that you have these experiences in your life, like a nurturing family, having enough food to eat, having an environment that nurtures you and you can pull on as a resource. And these are like credits that you can put in your account. And when we have challenges in our life, we withdraw from the account. And so if there are repeated challenges, what happens is that we can deplete our account. And then when we go into sort of a debit in our account, when these challenges continue and we don't have ways to cope. So it goes beyond our ability to cope. Next slide. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about a person's ability to overcome difficult experiences or hardship. And we talk about this as a lifelong process, not something that you're born with, but protective factors that may exist for you as an individual, within your family, within your community, and the impact that it has on your relationships and the environment around you. Next slide. So, as mentioned, there are protective factors and there are risk factors that will affect resilience. And these factors exist on an individual level, family level, community level. So, it uses these sort of social ecological model to help us understand how this impacts the different aspects of a child's life. Next slide. Adverse childhood experiences, we decided to focus on this rather than trauma itself because we understand the accumulation of adverse childhood experiences can show up as similar behavior to a traumatic event or a series of traumatic experiences. And so this can include different types of abuse, household challenges, neglect, or even community violence. Next slide. And I think we heard for some of the previous speakers, there are actual neurobiological responses to this impact on the child. And so it can range based on the individual child, that and this may be stress that they experience on a day-to-day basis and they're able to cope, or it could become toxic stress, distress, or even trauma, depending on how they've experienced the event. And what we know in terms of the brain's response to distress or trauma is that it's difficult to process emotions. The prefrontal cortex is offline, so thinking and cognitive functioning is impacted. And the brain goes into this fight, flight, or freeze response in order to help the person escape from danger. What we know about children is that this impacts their development as well. And so it can detour their typical developmental pathway. Next slide. So we look at all of these as sort of building blocks to help us understand and also operationalize trauma informed care through the lens of resilience. So we think about resilience, protective factors, adversity, the impact on development, and then we focus on building back resilience. Next slide. So, what you'll find in the guidance is a way to be able to unpack with the child the impact of this adversity. So, we use another metaphor within the guidance that we call opening the bag. And what this is basically is if you think about a child as wearing a backpack, and let's say that backpack is really, really heavy. I mean, within it, it may have resources, but it may also have a lot of heavy things that they're carrying based on their experiences. If it's too heavy for them to walk, if it's too heavy for them to continue along their developmental pathway, then it becomes a problem for them and they're no longer able to cope. And so we think about the role of the practitioner as helping them take off the bag, open it, and then start to unpack and process what's in there so that they can keep what nurtures them, which makes them more resilient, and they can process and perhaps overcome or at least integrate some of the experiences that have made the bag heavy. And so within the tool or the resource, you'll see a number of tools that will help the practitioner with assessments and with statements and with exercises and activities that will help to acknowledge the adversity, name the experience, engage with the child, and teach a child a number of different techniques and behaviors that will help them to overcome some of the adversity that they've experienced. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is just to put in the chat a link to the resource. And so what we're hoping is that you'll be able to explore the resource. Please give us your feedback. We're really hoping it will be a practical tool that practitioners and their managers will be able to use to really operationalize this idea of trauma-informed care. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Camille. I'm just really excited that in the presentations that we've heard today, there's just so much rich information, and I know that you will have the recordings, but also you will have links to these great resources that these different organizations and initiatives have developed for different target audiences, whether it be those community-based social workers or those working in a foster care program or with adoptive families. I think we have some fantastic documentation and experience being shared. Thank you so much, Camille. Next slide, please. And now I am absolutely delighted to introduce Mr. Kia Hem, who is the Trauma-Informed Care and Technical Manager for Hagar International, and will be speaking to us from Cambodia. Kia, welcome.
It is in Cambodian language. Thank you so much, Kelly, for the introduction. It is very much appreciated. Good evening from Cambodia. It is almost 10 o'clock in Cambodia. And yeah, so I just want to say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And my name is Kia. I am Trauma-Informed Care and Technical Manager for Hagar International in Cambodia. Hagar is an international organization that exists to see the community freeze and heal from the trauma of trafficking, slavery, and abuse. And it is my privilege and honor to share with all of you in this webinar. And I also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank to Better Care Network and Changing the Way We Care for this opportunity. Today, I am going to share with all of you about Hagar trauma-informed care approach and how we integrate this trauma-informed care approach into our foster care program here in Cambodia. Next slide, please. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, so trauma-informed care approaches differ according to cultures and contexts. All of them recognize the importance of working with the child, families, and wider community to promote the resilience and recovery, as you may have heard from our presenter. So this is how Hagar trauma-informed care approach look like. Hagar trauma-informed care approach, we provide the long-term support to our survivor. So we provide the survivor with the support and also social services that they need, no matter how long it takes. And raise awareness of the trauma. We inform the families and the community about the prevalence and the impact of the trauma, and we share the strategy with them to prevent re-traumatization. We collaborate to increase our impact, so we build the capacity of our partner to implement HEGA trauma-informed care approach in their work. And of course, as a trauma-informed organization, we prioritize on self-care for our practitioners. So we use trauma-informed care tool in our own organization to have practitioners to avoid the secondary trauma. And we advocate for the systemic change as well. So our trauma-informed care experience underpins our work to educate, to inform, to lobby for the law revision. We strengthen the protection and the system and collaborate with government and organizations around the world. Next slide, please. So as you can see in this slides, you can see the survivor is in the middle. So the survivor is the core of our work. We walk the whole journey with each individual survivor by providing self-accommodation, foster care services, counseling services, case management services, legal and protections, and reintegrations, and of course, economic and empowerment. And HEGA global strategy is driven by 5 strategic goals that are underpinned by our experience in trauma-informed care. So we ensure that everything that we do, we have to be expert in trauma-informed care. All our services, like what I just mentioned earlier, we have to these services have to be trauma-informed. Next slide, please. So sometimes we hear the question of how we can become more trauma-informed. So this is just something in our practice that I just want to share with all of you as well. In response to the question of how we can become more trauma-informed. So to become more trauma-informed, at HEGA, we build a trauma-informed community where we share the same knowledge related to trauma, the same knowledge related to the chronic stress, and also the adversity. And we share the same value and the core principle of the trauma-informed care, in which I will share with you later, and also our organization value as well. And we share the same languages, and we share the same practices that promote safety, voice, trust, and collaboration, and also the empowerment. So this can help us so that we can be all on the same page. Next slide, please. So at HEGA, our trauma-informed care approach, we recognize that the healing journey for each client and staff must be an individual journey, because we know that everyone is unique. So healing takes place through the safe and supportive relationship and caring relationship. And that staff provides support based on the 6 core principles of the trauma-informed care. So these are the 3 key that can assist people to recover from trauma. So when I just now mentioned about the trauma-informed care 6 key principles, so you may have heard, but I think some of you may have not heard about this yet. So I think it is also the opportunity to share with you. just now, my colleague have just shared with you about the 4R model. And I think probably this is a good opportunity to also share with you about the principle of the trauma-informed care, which is developed by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. So the first principle is safety. So we have to ask ourselves, do I practice safety for myself, my colleague, and my client? And when we talk about safety, it is not only about physical safety, but also psychological safety, social safety, and moral safety. And principle 2, it is about trust and transparency. So we may ask ourselves, do I provide information transparently so that people understand their choices? Do I build a healthy boundary in my relationship with the survivor? Do I create trust with the people I communicate with? Do I provide consistent responses and behavior? Do I clarify limit of the confidentiality? So this refers to the principle number 2. And principle number 3 is about the peer support. So anyone may have experienced trauma and adversity. Everyone should respect others' people experiences and give each other support. Respecting other people experiences will also support the safety, reliability, and also collaboration. And the principle number 4 is about collaboration. So healing occurs in the relationship that share the power and decision making. And principle number 5 is about empowerment, voice, and choices. And principle number 6 is about cultures, histories, and gender issues. So this we may have to ask ourselves, do I understand the impact of my own culture in my thinking? And probably we may have to ask ourselves, do I practice appropriate behaviors and stand against discrimination, including racial, cultural, and gender that our colleague and survivor of trauma may experience. Next slide, please. So HEGA Cambodia is one of the first organizations in Cambodia who started the foster care program. And the aim of the foster care is to provide foster placement for the short-term and long-term care for children who are unable to stay with their family of origin because of serious safety concern. And it is a family-like approach that helps children who live in a normal family life prior to reintegration. So foster care is actually the last option for the survivor, because we prioritize on their family care first. So we provide the support in order that the client can live with their family or their relatives. But if there's a risk safety concern, then the foster care program is the last option for the survivor. Next slide, please. So this is our HEGA foster care practice. And as I mentioned earlier, the 6 core principles of trauma-informed care are employed and integrated in this foster care practice. And you can also reflect to this principle in this practice in this slide as well. So I just want to share with all of you. First, it starts with the recruitment. So of course, we have to recruit the foster family, the people who might be interested to become a foster parent. So I will explain more in detail about the recruitment process. And once we have recruited and trained those foster family, then they are ready to accept the client to live under their care. So it's a time for the child placement. And I will also explain more in detail about this as well. Because the recruitment process and also the placement process are very, very important in our foster care practices. And when we place the client, we also continue to provide ongoing support and the follow-up with the survivor. And we provide all the services to the client. At HEGA, we call it the whole journey services, in which we provide safe accommodation, we provide counseling, case management, legal and protection, and so on, based on the need of the client. And sometimes, during the stay in the foster care, sometimes clients can experience or have crisis or incident. So our team work together with the foster parents and the survivor to deal and to solve the problem that may happen in the foster care. And also our foster family have formed a group to support one another. So they support each other, they can come together and share experience, and they encourage each other, sharing information and problem solving. Sometimes a foster family may have a very difficult child. So then they can seek support, of course, from HEGA staff, but at the same time, they can also ask for advice from other foster family who might have similar or experience similar situation as well. This is how they collaborate, how they support one another. And HEGA continue to provide ongoing capacity building. So we provide at least 2 times a year. The topic that we provide usually related to child protection, positive parenting, effective communication, conflict resolution, self-care, child rights, and of course trauma-informed care. And while the child lives with the foster family, we also allow them to have the connection with their family of origin as well. So at least twice a year, the survivor can visit their own family. And of course, they have the opportunity to call to their parents during their stay in a foster family as well. But we ensure that they can call to their parent while HEGA staff is there, so that we can provide support to them at the same time as well. And we also conduct annual foster care reflection. This is a time once a year that we invite all the foster families to come together. The reflection and the learning forum that provide foster parents the opportunity to share their learning, to share their experiences, to share their challenges and their reflection to improve their care under HEGA facilitations and leadership. And finally, the client can now finish with the foster family. So it's time that usually we conduct reintegration. So this means that the survivor can go back to live with their family of origin or with their relative. And we conduct case meeting with a relevant team, with the survivor, with their parents. And when they leave the foster family, of course, we organize a farewell between the foster family and survivors and the community people that the survivor have the relationship with, and that they have the opportunity to say goodbye. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the foster family recruitment process. So we start with the campaign planning. So this process is sometimes very complicated as well, and it is not easy to recruit a foster family because not everyone wants to become foster parent. Yeah. So at HEGA, we have to be very careful, but also we have to commit in terms of recruiting a good qualified foster family who can provide quality care to the survivor, to the children. So the team start the planning of the campaign, and then they conduct the recruitment campaign in the community. This is when our team member work with the local authority, with the community focal person, church leaders, and partners, and we organize event in the community, and we share and present about HEGA foster care program, and we give the application to those who might be interested, and then we conduct a pre-screening. So when they meet our criteria, we select the potential foster family and applicant for the capacity building. So after they meet our first, screening and the criteria, then we provide the capacity building to them. We provide training, usually training that we provide to them, like I mentioned earlier as well. Yeah. And then we do the family assessment. This means that our team will go to their community and we assess the family, and we ask questions to the local authority about this family. We ask questions, about this family, with the neighbors and the community people, because these people can be a good reference and can recommend. And once they meet our, assessment criteria, and then HEGA can give the authorization and or accreditation that we allow this family to look after the children under their care. Next slide, please. So this is the process of how we place a child in foster care. And this process is, I would say, it is very comprehensive. Yeah. So of course, we have to first start with identify the foster family, because at HEGA we have 4 different foster family foster care. So we have emergency foster care, we have traditional foster care, therapeutic foster care, and respite foster care. So we want to identify which foster care that meet the need of the survivor. And then we assess the need of that foster family and the client need. And then after that, we build the relationship and the visit. At this stage, we select between 2 to 3 foster family, and we allow the survivor to go and visit those foster family. The survivor, the child can spend 1 day, or they can spend overnight days and learn about that those foster family before they make the decision. So then we conduct a case meeting or case conference. This is a time when a child will have to make decision which family that they want to go to. And then after that, we can place the survivor in that family. And of course, after that, we continue to provide ongoing support. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Kelly. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the experience of Hagar in Cambodia and the excellent presentations from our other presenters. Thank you all so much. And I want to just give you a round of applause for keeping to time. We have approximately about 12 minutes left for question and answer. And I think we'll turn the presentation off. And I've taken a couple of the questions. Oh, we have a poll, sorry. So let's quickly do a poll, excuse me. The question is, what further information on trauma-informed care would you find useful? And you can click all that apply. So would you, excuse me, would you like to access more training on trauma-informed care? Would you like case studies, tools, experiences on how to support foster caregivers or foster children with trauma-informed care? Would you like case studies, tools, and experiences on how to support adoptive families and children who are adopted on trauma-informed care? Practical guidance for frontline community workers. When we say frontline community workers, we mean those who are engaging directly with children and families. Or the last one, you would like to participate in a community of practice related to care reform and trauma-informed care. So please do take a moment to respond to that, and then we will move into question and answer. Okay. Great. Do we have responses? I feel like we need a drum roll. Okay, excellent. It looks like it's pretty close for more training on trauma-informed care. I saw there was also a question asking about more webinars. I feel like this is just a beginning. It's a part one of a multi-part webinar series. Case studies for foster care, some for adoption, definitely practical guidance for those working directly with children and families. And half of you are interested in a community of practice. Excellent. Great. Well, that's very helpful for all of us to know. And we will be getting back to you, hopefully, with some of these opportunities. Okay, so I know that some of the questions have been responded to in written form, but I wanted to ask one question that came up, and it's two parts. It says, do those, oh, let's see, let me see, hang on, that was the wrong one. Just a minute, let's see. It is, so if the condition of trauma has a biological effect, is it possible to reverse that negative impact that trauma has? And the second part of the question is, how do we give or provide or promote a safe environment for a child if he or she lives in circumstances that might be violent, might be insecure? What are some key actions that a practitioner can do? So I wanted to, not to put our presenters on the spot, but I wonder, Julie, if we might start with you. Could you respond to the first part of, given that trauma does have biological effects, is it possible to reverse those negative effects?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question. It's a little more complex. Some biological effects, for example, fetal alcohol syndrome, doesn't just change the way that the neurological connections function, it changes the actual physical structure of the brain. And trauma-informed care will get you a bit further down the road, but it will not heal something like fetal alcohol syndrome. The same with something like an autism, a child on the autism spectrum, We've seen progress, but this isn't, trauma-informed care isn't a way that will heal that. Now, kids who have their brains are affected biologically because of that toxic stress, that toxic cortisol has broken down connections. Yes, absolutely, that can be restored through safety and relational connections. And we've seen that all throughout the research. So that's the great news.
Thank you. I like ending on a positive. That's great. And I wonder, Camille, if you can answer the second part of that question that was about, what can a practitioner do to help provide a sense or create or promote a sense of safety in a situations where children might be living amongst violence, human-made or natural disasters, insecurity. What are some concrete steps?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And so when we think about how to create a sense of security, one of the things that does that is routine, and having sort of access to things that you do on a regular basis and being able to maintain those routines. And so encouraging the family to be able to maintain routines, whether it's eating together, um, going to school. Some of these things might be disrupted, for example, in like a complex emergency, but any aspects that you can find that sort of parallel some sort of normalcy. These are one of the ways. Other things in terms of just the relationship, just being able to create a space for a young person to be able to express themselves. And sometimes that's not talking, because we talked about the way trauma can affect the brain, the cognitive functioning and sort of speech centers may be affected. So if it's drawing through art or through play, being able to create that kind of space as well, those are other things that can be done.
Excellent. Thanks, Camille. There was another question, and I'll let someone volunteer for this, but someone wondering from the presenters, if you have a tool that helps to identify which trauma is affecting a child and how a tool that would help you measure progress in terms of that journey to recovery. Or resilience. I wonder if anyone would like to volunteer to respond to that. Any of our presenters? Just turn on your camera and microphone and you can respond. Camille, thanks.
So I don't have an exact response in terms of being able to give you a link to the tool, but there are several tools that are used that sort of look at, you can use as sort of a baseline to look at certain symptoms, and then come back after a period of time to see if those symptoms have reduced. So what I can do, if it's okay, because I don't have the names and sort of links right now, is I can just put that together, and perhaps we can share that after the webinar.
Excellent. Thanks, Camille. And that's actually a perfect segue. I know several people were asking how they will access the recordings, the PowerPoints, and the resources, the links that have been shared. I am sure our esteemed colleagues at Better Care Network will be sending a follow-up email to all of you who have joined this webinar with that information. And I guess just one final question, as we have just a few minutes left, I would ask our esteemed presenters, what would be your key advocacy message to a care sector leader, whether that be government or practitioners? What is your key message that would advocate why integrating a trauma-informed approach is so critical to the work that we do with children and families? Any volunteers? If not, I'm going to have to pick some. I don't know, Patricia or Julie, Camille, Kia, if anyone, what would you suggest? Patricia?
Muchas gracias. Pues nosotros hemos estado trabajando aquí en México, en Nuevo León, con gobierno, y yo creo que la invitación es a conocer, a capacitarse primero. Yo sé que genera al principio mucha inquietud el explorar nuevas alternativas, nuevos conocimientos, pero yo creo que lo primero es atreverse a conocer un poquito más, a explorar más acerca del tema. Aquí hemos logrado que incluso todo el centro de gobierno que está dedicado al cuidado de los niños reciba esta capacitación, reciba esta información, no nada más los psicólogos, los trabajadores sociales, sino los cuidadores, desde los vigilantes, los médicos, todos aquellos adultos que tienen contacto con el niño, porque tenemos que compartir la misma visión y el entendimiento de lo que cada uno de nuestros niños necesitan. Entonces, creo que también desmitificar la idea de que las instituciones son malas, tampoco queremos como una visión de opuestos. Creo que las instituciones son necesarias en ciertos momentos para ciertas medidas, el modelo familiar de acogimiento también, el buscar favorecer la integración con las familias biológicas, pero tenemos que partir de un común denominador que sería el conocimiento informado en trauma.
Thank you, Patricia. Excellent, excellent. Well, looking at the time, I want to bring this fabulous webinar that I have been so privileged to be a part of to a close by thanking first and foremost our hosts and our presenters. It has been an absolute delight to work with these stellar professionals and learn from their wisdom and their experience. And I would just encourage all 291 of you who have joined to take advantage of the information. Please share widely with colleagues, be advocates in your own contexts for trauma-informed care. And please, if you have questions, comments, want some follow-up documentation, you can see the important links on the screen. But huge thanks as well to our wonderful translators. We were very happy that we could have such excellent representation from so many of you in Latin America. So muchísimas gracias. And thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. And please do look at these links, and we do look forward to seeing many of you within the collaborative platform. Thank you, and goodbye.